Remedial class where you get to have notes with you. So the year was 2012. I was new on the job, and I was on my first mission. The mission, you ask? Well, a hostile power had taken over my workplace, and it was my job to get rid of them. It started off as a case of an incompetent boss and a staff that wouldn't tolerate it, but it quickly turned into a case of international espionage. You see, I didn't realize that my boss had friends in the FBI and was part of an international crime ring. All I knew was that he was responsible for death threats against one of my students, and that was something that I couldn't tolerate. And so I lost some sleep, and I may have lost some weight during that time, but I vowed that I wouldn't let my friends down. And it may seem strange to you that I don't know the name of this shadowy international organization that I was working for, but that was the norm for this type of work, at least in my experience. Eventually, it got kind of dangerous. The Chinese government got involved, and there were moles in the FBI that were looking for me, and all of this was in an effort to help him. And this culminated one night when I couldn't sleep, and I was sitting on the sofa, and my wife confronted me about it. And so I decided to let her in on the secret, which was that my boss had these friends in high places and was out to get me. And so she agreed, or at least I thought she agreed at the time, to take me to a safe house. And so we're on our way in the middle of the night, and we're going to the safe house, and over the radio I can hear them talking about it, so I know that our cover's been blown. And it was bigger news than, the O.J. Simpson highway chase. Everybody was tuning in and trying to figure out what was going on. So you can imagine my shock and surprise then when we ended up at the hospital, because this was not a safe house at all. In fact, it was kind of the opposite. There were threats everywhere, and I was doing everything I could to hide. At one point, I even put a bedpan on my head to hide from the cameras, and thankfully it was empty. But eventually it sunk in that I had been betrayed by my closest confidant, by my wife. She had handed me over to the enemy, and they had put me in a psych ward. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to a psych ward, but no one there believes that they belong there. And I couldn't believe that she had put me there. And so I enlisted the help of lawyers, and eventually I escaped. Now, am I an international spy? No. But for a while I was, because that was my reality. And to this day, it's difficult to separate fact from fiction during that time. I wrote off the experience as a stress-induced episode of psychosis, and I moved on with my life. That's why I was so confused, you see, last year when I was called on my second mission. Because, you see, 7 years ago, they had diagnosed me as bipolar. I didn't believe them at the time, and I did everything I could to get off the medication with the doctor's help because I couldn't function while I was on them. I wrote off the experience as a stress-induced episode of psychosis, and most of the people that were in my life did as well. Because, if I was crazy, that must mean that the 30 other people that I got to sign a letter to our board of directors saying how incompetent our boss was at the time, they must be crazy too. I think in hindsight, though, maybe I'm just at my most convincing when I'm at the height of mania. See, one thing about bipolar people is that they can be really good at hiding it. The violent mood swings that you see, the caricatures of those, that's not been the norm in my experience, at least. Instead, what happens is this silent, inwardly focused reality that only you know about, and it blends so well with the real world that it's almost impossible to tell reality from your delusions. But like I said, in 2019, I was called upon again, and this time I was working with fellow spies. They just didn't know it. The only difference was this time I didn't trust my wife anymore. She saw the signs of mania early on, and she tried to intervene, and I was vowing that she would never put me in the psych ward again, and that was the big threat in my life. So I cut her out, and I made it so that she wouldn't be able to lock me up again. I began telling people that, in fact, I was worried about her and her mental health because I read an article somewhere about codependency, and I thought perhaps that was the reason why we were so toxic for each other, and so I shut her off. At one point, I was reaching out to people to see, am I crazy or not? And so I called my brother, and I had a conversation with him. I explained everything, omitting, of course, the international crime ring that I was trying to bust up. And he gave me a clean bill of health. And so I couldn't be crazy, right? And so I moved on with my life. And then she came to my place of employment, and she told my boss and my coworkers that they should send me home. Thankfully, I had already done the legwork, though, ahead of time. And I mentioned that this might happen. And so I told him that we were separating at the time, and by separating, I mean that I spent the night at home alone, sitting on the couch smoking cigars in the living room, probably for the only time in my life ever. But that's another thing about bipolar people, is that they can be deceptively easy to trust. They actually thought that she was the crazy one, but thankfully my boss did give me some time to go home. And within a few hours of that, I checked myself into the hospital and told them that I was going to kill myself. Here's the thing, though. I didn't actually want to kill myself. The delusions were going again, and what I thought had happened was that I had so exhausted my boss that I had caused her to be the victim of a heart attack. Now, did anyone tell me that this had happened? No, but that's the really crazy thing about being bipolar, is that these delusions are so easy to come by, and it's so easy to trick yourself. And so once again, I tricked myself into going into the psych ward. This time, of course, I reached out to an attorney again to try to get myself out, but I realized that there was something different this time. So this time, I wasn't nearly as stressed. Sure, I was taking one master's class, but in the past I'd taken multiple master's classes before at the same time, and I'd gotten my master's degree. I was just going back for the second one, so how hard could that be? Another thing about bipolar people is that sometimes they suffer from something called hypomania, and that's where you can do a whole lot of stuff, but without all the delusions. Now, looking back, I've graduated at the top of my class in my undergraduate and my graduate degrees, and so looking back, I can say there's probably been some times in my life where I've suffered from hypomania. But that's the thing about it. It's awesome. You can accomplish so much and do so many things and don't need to really sleep. It's great. This time, they put me on some more moderate medications. The doctors talked to me like a person, explained what was going on, and no longer did I think it was a stress-induced episode of psychosis. I realized that, in fact, I'm bipolar. Bipolar 1 specifically. So that was great, but it wasn't the end. You see, this time, I suffered from depression after that. So suicidal thoughts eventually crept in, and eventually it became impossible to accomplish even menial tasks. And I went back to the doctor, and they explained that in my mania, I had refused some crucial medication. So they changed up my prescription. They put me on Latuda. And I don't know if you've ever experienced Latuda, but in some people it can cause Parkinson's-like side effects. And within a day, I was twitching uncontrollably. Now I'm on a mix of antipsychotics and antidepressants, and it seems to be working for now. I've just celebrated the year after getting out of the hospital, and at times it's been excruciating, but I think I had the right balance of medications finally. Sure, there might be some weight gain this time, but therapy has helped as well, and like Amanda said, I've got a great support network, especially my wife. She's been a rock throughout all of this, and I don't know how she does it. At one point in my delusional state, I accused her of being weak, and nothing could be further from the truth. I don't know how she does it, and I can say that watching a loved one go through the experience of psychosis is definitely more difficult than going through it yourself. That I know for sure. Now I'm getting ready to leave the clandestine world behind, and I've embarked on a new mission, and that mission is turning my grandparents' property into an Airbnb, along with my brother. This time the enemy is no longer an international crime ring. It's just my brother's horrible sense of decor. But that is something that I can overcome, or at least learn to live with. And that's really all we can do, is learn to live with the new normal. I've learned some lessons over the course of this time, and the first is to get lots of sleep. The second is to listen to your loved ones. And the third is to take your mental health seriously. Thanks for listening.